What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pro vs. Pro, and welcome to US Open Week. Justin, you and I would both rather be playing. I guess talking about it is a nice consolation prize.
Yeah, no doubt. And especially as close as we were to giving ourselves a chance, just to have a chance to be in there, it would have been fun. But, maybe someday. It's just a dream, and we kind of know where we stand with this stuff. So, yeah, it'll be fun, especially with so many unknowns going into this week.
Yeah, I think to your point about like feeling like we had a real chance this year, it is nice to feel like it's not the last chance that we'll ever have, right? Like if I think we're both at a point now where in local qualifying, we know that if we just show up and play our game, there's a good chance we'll give ourselves that 36-hole opportunity in final qualifying.
You've got a lot more chances left than I do, but yeah, I agree. Same idea for sure. But yeah, it is. I'm smart enough to pick my courses around how I can play and the age factor of it. So yeah, no doubt. You get so many guys that love to do it just because. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this week and to see how it unfolds, and kind of got some new stuff going. And man, with all the stuff that's happened last week, and we don't really know what to expect.
Yeah. Speaking of new stuff, before we dive in, I do want to do a quick plug for FTN Network as a whole. We completely revamped our websites, new designs. They're fast, they're sharp. I think you guys will love them all. Whether you are a DFS guy, betting, or just fantasy sports in general, give those a chance. You can get free trials with any ftndaily.com/free, ftnbets.com/free, or ftnfantasy.com/free. Check out all of the great PGA stuff we have. If you're interested in other sports, use those free trials. You can take a look at all of it. Take a look at these redesigned websites. Really recommend you do so. I think you'll love what you find. So now that we've got that out of the way, the next point here is we got some really exciting stuff on the PGA front coming. Totally redoing kind of our PGA ownership page. It's going to be revamped with new rating systems. So lots to look forward to, all perfectly in time for the US Open.
Yeah, and it's really just good for even guys that kind of have the way that I think, right? That I kind of do things a little bit different in DFS than some others. But it's good. The tools give me I feel like even an added edge of finding certain little things that I may see a little bit more important than other people. So it's all readily available, and it is really neat. And to even go further than that, it's really fun across all sports. Whether I would say I'm a little bit more than a recreational player with golf, but like, some of the other stuff, I like to do it just for fun. And the FTN stuff really helps out just to kind of give you a guideline. So yeah, it's really good. And I'm, I've been really happy and really pleased to be part of the team and helping out with all that stuff.
We're happy to have you. And to your point about you not really like always being the most data inclined, I think one really cool thing is you can have some idea about a player and say, maybe I really don't think the data is going to be on this guy, but I like him. Let me see what it says. And then if you're like pleasantly surprised that, hey, you know what, the models actually do like him more than you expected, gives you all the confidence in the world to really take those necessary conviction stands on some GPP plays. And it's how you end up winning tournaments.
For sure. And like you said, it kind of gets you to pencil in a few guys. I think, especially it's really helped me when I've kind of been between guys, right? I get down to my final 2 or 3 and can kind of look at the models and stuff and see some projections and look at the stuff that I think is important. So
before we jump into the course fit for the US Open for LA Country Club, I want to ask you, what would you say is your favorite US Open storyline? Because I think the one that stands out to me the most is it sure seems like Brooks Koepka believes that he should be, and maybe justifiably so, to be in that conversation with Scotty and Rahm, at least when it comes to the best major players and the guys who should be most expected to find themselves at the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that he's not, right? So there's 2 storylines. If you want to talk about big players that I'm looking at here, if Scheffler does what he has done tee to green, I'm not sure that anybody can beat him. Just because of the venue and how hard it is. I generally lean away from favorites, and I don't like spending a lot of time on that situation. That being said, like what he's done tee to green has been crazy, and you should see it even more at a U.S. Open venue. So I would look for that storyline to see how that plays out for sure. And then we have to somewhat mention the Rory folding on Sundays for a couple weeks in a row here as a big storyline going in too. Like, does that make you think that, you can play him because he'll be in contention, or hey, I can't play him because I know he can't finish?
Yeah, I love that discussion. Before we get to Rory, the Scotty point is a really good one too, because it definitely seems like there are two aspects of his game right now that are at an unsustainable level. Number one, you can't be historically good with your tee to green play event after event after event. Eventually, you need the putter to also help you out. But at the same time, the putting has been so bad that we should expect at least some positive regression. Like even if we're not saying, I expect him to start making all these putts sooner or later, he's not going to continue to lose multiple strokes per round on the greens. So it does seem like something has to give for Scotty. I definitely think that's one of the top storylines. But man, the Rory one is fascinating too, because we're recording this Sunday at 5 Eastern right now. So Rory is, I believe, 1 over on the day at the moment. Yeah, 1 over, -11, tied for 9th on the week through 12 holes at this very moment. So second consecutive Sunday, he had a real chance, was one of the favorites heading into the final round, and just kind of an inexplicably uneventful round, just way too many mistakes, not enough good shots.
Yeah. And then it's weird because he is so good and so talented, and I'm not getting wrapped up in all the other conversations, whether that's true or not. The only other storyline I see this week is, does California golf translate? Because obviously if it does, you click in Max Homa and John Rahm right out of the gate, and then you just build from there.
Before we get into that, because I think that's so adjacent to the course fit discussion, I want to ask you one specific thing about Rory. My thought with him is I don't care that he has been in contention and hasn't closed the door now 2 consecutive times. What does give me a little bit of pause is the fact that prior to last event, he was saying, I've made some changes in my swing. I'm starting to get comfortable. And then the swing was its worst in that Sunday pressure. You and I both know when you do make a swing change, when does it get tested the most? When you find yourself under the most amount of pressure the first few times that you're trying to sustain that change in that pressure. So does that aspect of this make you think there's more to these Rory struggles than, hey, anyone can struggle on any given day? It just so happened to be 2 straight Sundays for him.
So it makes me actually like him more, because if he would have, spent the last 2 weeks around 30th, 40th, where there's no real pressure, and gone out and shot a 6 under Sunday and finished, backdoor top 10 or whatever, it wasn't really ever under pressure, right? Now he knows how his body's going to react. He knows what's going to happen in the golf swing under the gun. So that being said, if you want to look at it that way, it actually makes me lean more towards liking Rory than away from him, because he does have 2 weeks of experience with something new. So that's kind of where I would stand on that deal.
I love that answer so much. I'm completely in agreement with that. I think that's such an awesome way to look at it too, because we know all of these guys have what it takes under pressure. Rory has won major championships. We know that he has the mental toughness to do so. So having these learning experiences to immediately draw from, I'm with you. I think they can absolutely help him more than it hurts him. And we know that the field will be a little bit hesitant because of the struggles, thinking that there's this narrative worth believing that he just can't get it done under pressure anymore.
Yeah, he's way too talented. Like, he's going to win again. It's just win. And if it's this week.
All right, let's get to some course fit stuff. The course fit model for the U.S. Open, like the PGA Championship, can be considered more of an event fit model than an actual course fit model. Of course, we don't have any of the requisite data on Los Angeles Country Club to make a course fit model from that. So instead, we're using U.S. Opens as a whole. And again, same argument that we made at the PGA Championship. If there isn't a consistency from one U.S. Open course to the next, the course fit model is going to show us numbers that are pretty close to tour average. The model as a whole is not going to be very predictive. It's going to be pretty weak. And essentially that's going to tell us, hey, there's no consistency. We can't hang our hats on any one stat or any two stats carrying over into success. That's not what we find. We do find a model that gives us very unique weights and is very powerful from a predictive standpoint, telling us that course after course, most likely because the setups are similar in nature, do test golfers in a very consistent way in the US Open. This week, the main calling cards of that are distance is much more important than accuracy off the tee, especially in relation to what we typically see. Iron play and around the green play, quite predictive. The biggest jump, though, of all comes in the predictive power of putting, which I think you will probably agree with this. I think what that's saying is, hey, the US Open is always going to be tough. No matter where it is, it's going to be tough. So you're going to be left with a lot of testing par putts, 6 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet, the range that is most likely to be stable and predictive in the putting world. Does that analysis kind of jive with what you're thinking here?
For sure. I did notice that this week the fairways are a touch wider than normal for US Open. So I think that you'll see some of the putting kind of come back to a median there. But yeah, in general, I'm going to look for, who's really good from that 10-foot in range. And then once again, like you said, I think that distance does matter this week because just because of the rough type and the controlling of your golf ball, and it's a lot easier to do with shorter clubs and the fairways being a little bit wider.
When it comes to the fairways being a little bit wider, I think the first point that I would make there is I do think there's a chance that they are wider in reality than in the way they actually play. It does look like there are some slanted fairways in some like runoff areas where you have to be very particular about the part of the fairway that you hit in order to hold the fairway. But we will see there. Do you think that the width of these fairways will make accuracy off the tee more important? Because it does mean that a lot of the field are going to be hitting fairways and you're going to need to be in the fairway if you want any chance to control the spin coming into these firm greens and actually giving yourself scoring opportunities? Or do you think that it will be easy enough to hit fairways for everybody that accuracy is even diminished more than usual in US Opens?
I think it's so unpredictable as of now to see what they do with the golf course and see what kind of weather they get. If they get any kind of rain or anything, length automatically becomes the key factor. We haven't really seen enough. I know the USGA's put out a couple videos of showing how thick the rough was, but outside of that, I really haven't seen much on how they're going to set it up.
I think my favorite thing that you just said there is that we don't know what the answer is in terms of this, emphasis or de-emphasis off the tee or with accuracy specifically when it comes to these fairways. And that's okay. It's very okay, even advantageous to say there's uncertainty here. I'm not going to try to predict something that I can't predict. I'm just going to embrace that uncertainty and try to use it to my advantage. One of the ways that we can do that is going in with skill set stacks. So let's say you're playing 3 different lineups this week. You can build one stack or one lineup that goes kind of all in on accuracy off the tee and iron play. The next one can be all about distance and around the green play. Combinations like that where we don't know how it's going to play. But if it emphasizes certain areas of the game far more than others, then you can really find the guys who are most likely to jump to the top of the leaderboard all in like a group together.
And I'll even go a step further than that where when I build a US Open, a US Open line or anytime I know it's going to play hard, I'm going to always look for the guys that I believe are the most skilled players, not necessarily the numbers, but the guys that I truly believe are the top tier players throughout the bag. It's kind of like at the players when I talked about Minwoo Lee and we talk about Siwoo Kim. I want the guy that I believe is the premium player at their price range on DraftKings, not a guy that takes advantage of certain golf courses and certain events. They're obviously all great players, but there are some players out there that are out there doing a great job making a living. There are also some guys out there that have talent to be a top 20 player in the world. It just hasn't all happened that way yet.
Right. Yeah, love that point. And speaking of Minwoo Lee, by the way, one other aspect of the course fit model for US Opens as a whole that has shown up year after year is that there is an emphasis on long iron play. Minwoo Lee is pretty disastrous throughout the bag with his irons, with half wedges, full wedges, and mid irons. And then he's an excellent long iron player. And we saw him kind of buck the trend of mid iron play being really important at the players, and driving accuracy being really important at the players, by just hitting so many long irons off the tee, putting the driver away, gaining so many strokes that way. Maybe he's able to do that this week as well. And even if he can't, if you're just leaning into the long iron aspect of this course fit model, I think that points to Minwoo Lee. The putting points to Minwoo Lee. Around the green play points to Minwoo Lee. We might have our dark horse already. Only $7,000 on DraftKings, by the way. So if he's at all contrarian, he might be like our collective GPP winner pick of the week.
Yeah, for sure. With him and then Siwoo Kim at 7,300, like I could definitely see a lot of builds starting right there. And, and just, Woodland's too cheap as well for a guy that we know has the talent to win in this situation. I just think that, once again, I'm going to look for the guy that I believe is the most talented player at every level and every price range. And I just think that's what the US Open leans to. And I hate to say this, but like if I was playing or you were playing, our ownership would be like 0.1. It would be the people listening to the show or our friends that are like, hey, just in case, right? So like there's like 30 guys that you can throw out before we even start. So, yeah. And one of them might make the cut, but so be it. It's just it's a huge leverage week if you're going to do it the correct way, right? There's going to be people that are playing people because they're their friends, and oh, I know that guy. That being said, like Stanford, did I see something? Stanford had like 4 of their top 5 got into the US Open. Like that's amazing to me.
That's awesome if true. I haven't seen that, but that's pretty spectacular. What a week for them. I'm sure they'll all travel together and they'll have a blast.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I just, it'll be it'll be interesting to see the way it plays out. But I think that this is one of the few weeks where I generally try to play a little bit higher stakes and a little bit more contest, just because I feel like there's more leverage against the field.
I like it. One of the conversations that you and I have had so far this week about the course is based on the rough. We know that the rough here is Bermuda, but when we see video of it, it's not like the Bermuda that we're used to playing, whether down in Florida, Texas, all those mini tour Bermuda events, where you get this like really short rough where you're always getting flyer lies, no ability to control the spin, super unpredictable in that way. And that's the challenge of it. This Bermuda rough looks long and tall. It reminds me of the rough at PGA National, by the way. I think that's the closest comp that I can come up with to it. I don't know if it's the same type of grass as PGA National. It just has the same look to me, where it maybe doesn't look quite as thick as the type of rough that I'm accustomed to seeing in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, New York, all those areas. I'm curious, what do you anticipate being the challenge out of the rough? Is it the thickness? Is it the inability to gauge what type of spin you're going to get out of the rough? What are you expecting here?
Yeah, so there's going to be a few guys that figure it out faster than everybody else. Mm-hmm. The videos I've seen already, it's not really like a web together Bermuda like I'm used to seeing here. It's more of a free, like straight up and down standing Bermuda. Yeah. But I think that you're going to get some that, are going to play for a big flyer and it's going to come out dead. Some that are playing for it to come out dead, they get a flyer. There's going to be people working on that. And it even goes for around the greens. When you get the really thick rough in the Northeast around the greens, basically everything turns into a bunker shot. And it's pretty predictable. You're going to get a lot of people really struggling with what the ball is going to do. They may execute everything just like they want to. And one time it comes out dead, the next time it comes out fast. I've always thought that like a medium length Bermuda could be harder than the thickest of thick because of the unpredictability.
Yeah.
But that being said, nowadays you get grandstands behind every green. You get a huge flyer, you hit in the grandstand, it doesn't matter. You get free drops. So It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I hope they. I would guess they're going to struggle, especially if they get the greens really firm. I don't know if the USGA is going to be patient with the greens or if they're going to get them firm and fast right out of the chute. I mean, do we want another Phil episode where he's just hitting the ball while it's moving because it's playing so ridiculous? Or
yeah, it's tough to say. I do expect the greens to be pretty firm early on because I think that the firmness of the greens is the best defense of this golf course, and I'm sure that they want this golf course not just to hang in there, but to really make a statement. It's a little bit reminiscent of when the U.S. Open was held at Marion, in my mind, where going in there were maybe some rumblings like, hey, I'm not sure how well this golf course is going to hold up. We could see some really low scores, much lower than the USGA wants to see, and then we end up getting a winning score of either even or +1. I can't remember where Rose won it at Marion, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see that sort of thing where this course actually plays a lot tougher than expected. I know that they can trick up the whole locations on these greens, so I think they have much more control over the score this year than they might in most years, where they can make this like an even par winner, or if this wasn't the U.S. Open, they could get the winning score to like 20 under by setting easy locations, making it a little bit softer, things of that nature.
Yeah, for sure. And like I think it just leads into the unpredictability of what they decide to do.
Do you have any? Go on.
Go ahead. No, it's just like the USGA just never gives you a clear-cut answer of what they're going to do. They get overly aggressive, and then they get overly conservative, and there's no like, hey, this is what they're going to do. There's no predictability to it.
Yeah. And I think that's okay, honestly, because as long as it presents a challenge and gets the best players to the top of the leaderboard, I don't really care what they do. But I think they will end up making it really challenging. But do you have any guys who immediately come to mind as like your first leans, guys who think have a really good chance of winning, guys you might be betting on in the long shot market or the overall outright market, anything like that?
I mean, obviously, Siwoo at 7,300 looks great. I'm a big believer in this Bennett kid. He's come out, made his first 2 cuts on tour, getting more comfortable, hits the ball far. I wouldn't be surprised if, as a huge long shot, to see him play well. I think it's just kind of the guys that the few guys that we've already hit on. Once again, I'm just going to look for the best, most talented players.
So Siwoo Kim at 100-1. How does that sound to you?
I mean, I think that the way that I always look at it is can he win? If they played this event 100 times, would he win 1 time? And I would say yes. Like, he would be more likely to win twice than 0, in my opinion, with the way he's playing. So that's kind of how I look at it as far as value goes. Obviously, he's still got to do it at the time.
And we just saw him contend in U.S. Open-like conditions at Muirfield Village, finished 4th, had a disastrous start. I think we touched on this a little bit last week, but it's worth revisiting. Siwoo on Saturday and Sunday came out, made bogeys in bunches early, and found a way to not just get himself back into those rounds, but ended up with some of the better rounds of the entire day. That type of patience and resistance, I guess you could say, resiliency throughout those rounds are something that we haven't necessarily seen from him. A lot of the time when we have had our doubts with Siwoo, it's what happens when things don't go his way. He just kind of, gets frustrated and makes mistakes and starts compounding those mistakes. So for him to bounce back like that, I think showed us a lot and makes me very, very confident in backing him this week.
For sure. And then, if we think it's going to be a putter's paradise, you've got to lean into Denny and Taylor Montgomery and some of these guys that that are going to, if they get a putt inside 10 feet, they're probably going to hole it. And so, that would be the other places, if we're going to look at skill set stuff, that would be the other place I'm looking early as far as long shots. I think Eckroat can compete here. I think that his talent is coming, and I think he's got some confidence. But like I said, I just think that the U.S. Open's not a lot. I don't think you get a surprise winner here. I just don't. If you're a surprise winner, it's going to be somebody that we're talking about that we know is uber talented, that just finally strings it together.
Kind of a perfect segue here. I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think Cameron Smith's odds are to win the U.S. Open?
Man, the fact that you know that I haven't looked at it is crazy, but I haven't looked at anybody's odds. 35-1.
It's a good guess. 33. And I think I'm all over that. Like I think fair for him would be somewhere between 20 and 25. So I see a ton of value here. We talked about the unpredictability of just how important driving accuracy is going to be. There are multiple paths to accuracy off the tee not mattering as much as it usually does. The first would be, hey, these fairways just have these like very specific tilts and runoff areas that everybody's going to be dealing with. So being accurate doesn't necessarily make you significantly more likely to hit fairways than other guys. And then there's also the path where these fairways are wide enough that even he, with his not below average accuracy, but accuracy that is far below the other best players in the world, it doesn't hurt him as much because he too is hitting fairways. And if you get either of those for him, I mean, he hemorrhaged strokes off the tee at the PGA Championship and still was in contention because the rest of his game is that dominant. So if you take away the disadvantage off the tee and you just make it a second, third, and fourth shot contest, there's no reason why Cameron Smith won't be at the very top of the leaderboard at the end of the week.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is the attitude around people here, right? Is with the live stuff and the PGA Tour stuff going to calm the tensions in their attitudes. I think Cam is one of the few that he didn't care. He was just doing his thing. It didn't matter. But I still think it's going to be a weird interaction, right, between the guys that hated each other, and then they're like, oh wait, we can be friends again, right? So it's going to be a different scene, far different than just a few weeks ago, at the PGA where they were all together. So I even just us talking, I noticed we haven't talked a lot about the live PGA Tour guys because they're obviously all coming back together again at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I know it's true for myself, and I assume it's true for a lot of golf fans. There's a little bit of fatigue here, right? Like, we are golf fans. We want to watch the best golf. We want to be thrilled by the level of competition and the quality of the golf that we watch. We don't necessarily care for all of this drama week after week. So while it's a really interesting discussion, especially when it comes to just the golf, I think that's also why we're maybe steering away from it a little bit. But to that point, would you have guessed at the beginning of this year that we would see 33-1 for Cameron Smith, 40-1 for Dustin Johnson, and then 11-1 for Brooks Koepka?
I mean, the DJ number is crazy, especially so I would say the recent news of the coming back together might affect him as much as anybody because he's like, oh, I better start practicing again. I better start playing again. It's not going to be the same gravy train that I thought I had where I just could go finish 25th of 63 guys and just cruise around here. So, that's an intriguing number on him. And I'm glad you brought that up because did he, is he, since all the news came out, did he go, man, I better get back after this?
I'm not sure. I kind of think that he's approaching this event the way he approaches most, where he, it does some level of preparation for it, but also just trusts in his game and believes that he has what it takes to go out and contend. I think the most interesting part of this, though, is, for DJ, very little to work from on the season as a whole. Failed to get a top 40 in each of the first two majors, whereas Cameron Smith, he was the one who kind of had the narrative that he was really struggling early on in the season. He goes out, finishes 34th in the Masters, nothing special there, was really bad off the tee, was great elsewhere, and then finds a way to top 10 in the PGA Championship while again losing over half a stroke off the tee. Was just spectacular everywhere else. So I think that Cameron Smith has a lot more to build on from this season. I probably would have had him ahead of DJ coming into this year in terms of my rankings, just in terms of win equity in these golf tournaments. So to have such a small split between Cameron Smith and DJ, I don't necessarily think that it's wrong of the market to still give DJ some respect. I just, again, think Cameron Smith is being really undervalued by the market. He should be 20-1, not 33.
I don't disagree at all. And I guess with Koepka being 11-1, Scheffler's got to be 8 or 9-1. I mean, I don't know. I mean, are they that close together that? I mean, it's just so weird. I can't. If you told me which one would I back, it would be Scheffler all day, right?
Like Scotty is 7.5, Rahm is 11, and we also have Koepka at 11, and then Rory has fallen to 12. Fallen to 12-1 to win the U.S. Open. Do you think it's a mistake to have him still be in this top tier, or does the market know what we feel, that like it doesn't really matter what he does in these tournaments? It doesn't really matter what his recent form is, because it's still going to be true that if Rory is on, he's going to compete with the very best of anyone's week.
Yeah, no, I think that everybody knows that how good he can. And you know, you talk about win equity a lot, and everybody knows how high his win equity is when he really plays good, and especially when he drives it good. He's such a huge advantage over everybody because he drives it so good day in and day out. You know, when it comes down to it, I tend to, thinking about the way the public looks at everything, I tend to go, even though we can't use it, is go look at the Betfair market, which is, the European, and it's a true exchange, right? So it's basically me and you betting against each other, which is, I wish we had something like that here. Yeah. But it's, I go look at that and see who's moving where and seeing what the public perception is. And a lot of times, if I see people loading up on one side and really see a significant difference, I tend to fade that player a lot. So, it's just, I would generally say that that Vegas is smarter than your average Betfair gambler, right? So if somebody's willing to buy Scheffler at 6-1 and Vegas will give you 8 or 9-1, I'm going to lean away from playing Scheffler and maybe go to a Rory that's at 15-1. So, it's just a different mind. It's just everybody thinks a little bit different. That's just kind of how I pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I mean, I've got a friend that they're from Scotland and they go back and forth, and by the time they're done, they get their position to where they basically can win no matter who wins. It's pretty fun to watch and see how they do it all.
I want to ask you about one more specific player, and then we'll just kind of run through the DraftKings pricing and kind of point to our favorite players so far before we get a good sense of what ownership will be. Cameron Young is priced all the way down at $8,000. For those who haven't heard the Cameron Young spiel before, we have a statistic here at FTN, birdie rate over expectation, that basically says, given how well or poorly a player has played, he has made X percentage points more birdies than we would expect or fewer birdies than we would expect. So the other way that you can kind of translate this statistic is somebody with a really high birdie rate over expectation is extremely likely to outproduce his real life finishing position in the DraftKings scoring leaderboard. So if the guy finishes 40th on the leaderboard, there's a good chance he's in the top 20 in DraftKings points, things of that nature. Both last year and this year, Cameron Young was the number one guy in birdie rate over expectation, at least among the best players in the world. So now down to $8,000. When you look at the struggles he's had, and again, he's struggling. He struggled again this morning. So it's not like we can say, I just want to see some sign of life from him on the weekend. We're going in blind on it. He hasn't shown any signs of turning this around. But if he does, he could absolutely demolish this $8,000 price tag. How contrarian do you think he has to be for you to have interest? And is there anything in his game that you've seen lately that makes you think a resurgence is possible?
So I obviously think he has the talent level to, when it clicks and he figures it out, he's going to be fine. You can't drive it like he does and not figure it out at some point, especially with being how young he is. I think the key to me, I love that you brought him up, is I looked at the pricing and I was like, I love it because Jason Day is going to take all of his ownership.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah,
like, this is a
Day's
great
8,100
spot.
for those who haven't looked yet.
Yeah. So I was like, I can pivot down, and I think that he'll get so overlooked with Day at 8,100. So I really like where he's at price. Matter of fact, he was in my first build. I had 8,100 or 8,200 available, and I chose to go down to him. So I think that, like you said, it just depends. You want a safe play that you can get 35th out of, or do you want that bunch of birdies, top 5? So maybe the contest you're playing or whatever.
This is definitely the most interesting price range to me on DraftKings because there are a lot of aspects of this price range that are the exact same as they have been in almost every single elevated event that we have seen this season. Connors, 7,800. Keegan Bradley, 7,600. How many times can we play these guys just because they are clearly underpriced for their talent level in these fields? But now all of a sudden you have the inclusion of these two guys. Jason Day, 8,100. He's been around 9,000 most events. Cameron Young, same thing, all the way down to 8,000. So it's going to be really interesting to see what ownership looks like this week. And I think my biggest takeaway is I don't want to get too emotionally connected to any of these players just yet, because ownership is going to play a huge part in this. Where, if we see Cam Young is 5%, I think I'm with you. I'm just playing him there. I think the more likely outcome is people love playing Cameron Young. You get this massive price drop, and people will probably think that he's sneaky because of how poorly he's played. But now you get him on a really tough golf course that off the tee play maybe matters a little bit more to people than it does in most weeks. So I think he's going to be 15 to 20% again, and I'll just fade and go to some of the guys that we've landed on a lot this year. The guy in this range, though, that makes the most sense to me, I think, is Adam Scott. He's turned himself into one of the best putters in the world. He's still super long off the tee. Accuracy off the tee is maybe one of the things that holds him back when he plays poorly, though he's better. He's been better in that regard lately too. But I think the putting really makes him correlate well with Cameron Smith too, who I'm pretty sure is going to be in my DraftKings lineup in addition to having an outright bet on him. So Scotty at 7,500 is really calling my name. I don't know what you think about him.
For sure. And like you said, he's kind of revamped his career. It looks like he seems very in tune and working hard. And you have to have some value there for sure. And then the other guy that I kind of want to mention too, I don't know if you've watched scores today at all, but does a guy like Hatton shooting 8 under, he's tied for the lead today, does that make you like him more, or maybe he used it all up and he's going to be tired and, by the time he gets out there? I will say at least east to west travel is probably easier than the other way. So that helps him a little. But, just curious your thoughts on, such a good round out of Hatwood, Fleetwood being in contention. A lot of these guys that we talk about that I think that I would be, I'd be heavily vested in a guy like Hatton this week. But, 8 under in contention may either just barely miss a playoff or be in a playoff. Do you lean towards him or away from him?
So I'm leaning towards him for sure. And it's not necessarily because of what he's doing this week. I will say one of the things about this week specifically that I like to see from him is historically he hasn't really had the ceiling rounds the way many other guys have. Well, he's got 2 of them this week. So we're starting to see him score at a really high rate in addition to just being the consistently great player that he is. I mean, 19th at the RBC Heritage, 3rd at the Wells Fargo, 5th at the Byron Nelson, 15th at the PGA Championship, 12th at the Memorial, and now contending this week. The guy has just been truly one of the best players in the world all season long, and I don't think people are quite valuing him in that way yet. And again, what is he, 8,900 for this week for the US Open?
I think so. 9,000.
The start of $9,000 Cameron Smith, who should be contrarian, with Tyrrell Hatton, who I imagine is going to be chalky at 8,900. But my God, that price is just horrific for him. That's a really intriguing start because it means you don't have to get risky with a single player. You might be able to bottom out your lineup with Keegan Bradley, Corey Connors, somebody at that level.
Well, the thing that I think is so impressive about Hatton is that he's competing on every type of golf course.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a specific golf course. I mean,
That
Byron
shows up-
Nelson, the Memorial are so different, and he
Yeah.
competed at both of them.
That shows up in his strokes gained profile too, because the guy is just spectacular all around. Like historically, I think people probably remember him as being the guy who is an absolute grinder. He's great around the greens. He can make putts. But he maybe is a streaky iron player, something like that. Well, we started to buy low on him maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that, because all of a sudden he started to drive the ball really well. And the better he drives the ball, the more he can lean on that sometimes streaky, sometimes just solid iron play. Around the green play and the putting has always been there. So the better he can drive the ball, the more he can take advantage of the rest of his skill set. And that's exactly what has happened. So I think his ascent to being one of the better players in the world has actually been fairly predictable, because it was based on this major improvement with his off the tee play. And that is just continuing to be there week after week after week. So it really feels like he has one of the highest floors in the absolute, in the entire field, I should say.
So I can't believe I haven't talked about this before. A buddy of mine went out and his work was sponsoring or whatever at the Nelson, and Hatton was the one that, like, the player that hung out with him. And so they're like, hey, you want a beer or whatever? He's like, no, I quit drinking. And he's like, oh, really? Like, were you trying to get fit, or like, what was it? Why'd you quit drinking? He's like, he said he fell in love with hazy IPAs. He's like, they got a hold of it. But he said it had nothing to do with being fit, nothing. He said he just felt like when he didn't drink, he woke up with a better mental well-being. Like, he didn't have he's like, I wasn't getting drunk. I wasn't like doing anything crazy. He's like, whatever, for whatever reason. So like, looking back at him telling that story now and the way that he's played, that has to have made a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be a part of it.
Yeah, even if it's an indirect thing, like he just wakes up and is more motivated, more focused, practicing on his game. Like even if it's something that simple, it is certainly translated. I love that. That's a great nugget of information.
Yeah, and he said it was just the hazy IPAs. I thought it was so funny. He's like, man, those hazy IPAs are really good. So I was like, I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
No, he's yeah. So like I said, there's all those little things. There's other guys that I know love to go out and. I mean, I can promise Cam Smith is probably going to have a few beers this week. Like, it's just a different, whatever works for whatever person. So,
and the funny thing is, Cam Smith might say. Cam Smith might give the exact same reasoning for why he drinks. He just feels a little bit happier in the morning when he had drunk the night before, right? So,
yeah, right.
Whatever works. That's absolutely true.
That's right. So, but yeah, I should have mentioned that before. I don't know how I didn't, but yeah, it's a cool thing about Hatton, and maybe it is correlating. So hopefully he doesn't win this week. So he has his too many hazy IPAs tonight. Might be not be in the same mindset.
We touched on Minwoo a little bit at $7,000, Siwoo 7,300. We kind of skipped over the entire top range of the board. Is there anybody else near the top that you think really stands out this week? Someone who might get overlooked, or someone that you don't really care how high owned they get, you're just going to back them?
I mean, if I'm gonna play anybody at the top, it's going to be Scheffler, just because I think the strokes gain correlation off the tee to green here is such a big deal. If I don't play Scheffler, I don't see myself playing. I could almost skip all the way to the Cam Smith Hatton range. Yeah. I think that I may be a little bit involved with Rory if the ownership is correct. We'll see how that works out. I really don't have much interest in, like, I see all this talk about Hovland and guys like that, and I just don't. I can understand it. It's just, I think that you've got to make a stand somewhere. And I think that throwing those guys out, Rahm, Homa, Hovland, that whole crew, I think I'm just going to throw out.
Do you remember what I said to you about Brooks in the PGA Championship week, the week after the PGA Championship, I should say?
About him deserving to be
No, so
with those guys?
in relation to DFS specifically, and
I don't.
and the U.S. Open specifically. So what my point was, when we get to the U.S.
Oh,
Open,
where they would price him?
yeah. So I wanted to remind myself not to use somebody instead of Brooks. Where if I can have Brooks in that lineup just with a 1v1 change, I should get Brooks in there. So the only way I don't play Brooks is by just going way down below. So, maybe I just opt for a really balanced lineup like that Cam Smith, Tyrrell Hatton start. And you can throw Finau in there. You can throw Spieth in there. You can go to Morikawa or Homa, Schauffele even at 9,600 and still be super balanced. So I think that's probably the most likely route that I'll go. But I also think we see this a lot, like the concept of a player not being owned the week after he wins. Now, obviously, this is month plus after the PGA Championship when it comes to Brooks' win. But I do think that people are going to put Scheffler and Rahm in a completely different tier than Brooks. And I think that might be a mistake. I think it might be Scheffler, Rahm, Brooks in their own tier when it comes to win equity for this major championship. Not just the fact that it's a major, but it's the U.S. Open. Like, this is the type of event that he's built for. Just everything about his game, his mentality, I think works so well in U.S. Opens. So there's definitely an ownership where he could get to that's just low enough that I know with certainty I'm starting my lineup Brooks Koepka, Cameron Smith, Tyrrell Hatton, and figuring out from there.
Yeah, and it's you can't argue with it either, right? Like when I build my 3 max lineup, I'm sure. So I probably won't have them in my 200 single unless I decide to play all 3 of the 200 singles, which I may do this week. I just you got to play them in at least in the if I do the 3 max, I'll play them in 2 of the 3. If I just end up doing the 3 200 singles, I'll play him in at least 1 of the 3. It's just because if he's got a chance to win on Sunday, will you be surprised? Like, would you be like, oh, didn't see that coming?
Not surprised at all.
No, zero. Like, so these majors and stuff, especially when it's really difficult, I just think that he just has a different gear.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think that'll do it. We will have bets posted in the tracker at FTN Bets. We will have all the content you could possibly need in the FTN Discord and articles, all of that good stuff. So reminder, use those free trials, ftndaily.com/free, ftnbets.com/free. You can also use promo code PRO for 20% off any package if you just want to jump right in. We've had a great season here at FTN, and we're looking to continue that. Thank you again for joining us this week for some U.S. Open discussion, and we will catch you next time.
Sounds good.